Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the Public Interest Law Gathering. If you weren't with us yesterday, my name is Lisa Chamberlain, and I'm based at Wits Law School and part of the PILG coordination team. I wanted to start us off today by emphasizing how much of a collective effort PILG is, which is why yesterday and continuing today, you will have seen and heard from a whole range of different people throughout the program. And this isn't just organization, it's very deliberate because we really wanted to create a space where we heard from as many different and varied voices as possible over these 2 days, as a reflection really of how social justice struggles take shape both collectively and collaboratively in South Africa. So hopefully at the same time, we're also managing to maintain enough of a sense of continuity to make the event flow. And this is one of the key reasons that we have a theme for PILG every year. This year's theme, as you know by now, is the relationship between the COVID-19 pandemic and social justice or social injustice. And that's the golden thread that weaves through all of our discussions over these 2 days. And of course, a big part of PILG has always been about building community and strengthening our solidarity with each other in the context of the difficult times we live in and the difficult work that we do. Doing that online is obviously very difficult. We debated having those kind of virtual social or networking sessions that people are trying to experiment with at the moment. But to be honest, we decided that mostly those kinds of things don't work and they can often feel very artificial. And so, and also in the programming of the event, as I mentioned yesterday, we've worked very hard to keep it light. We're conscious of everyone's levels of exhaustion and screen fatigue. And we really want PILG to be something that is a source of energy and that you leave these 2 days feeling energized rather than it being just a kind of another thing to think about and do and a source of drain. So with that said, how can you as participants in PILG contribute to the feel of the event and to the kind of community building focus of PILG? There's kind of 6 things that you can do. The first, sorry, let me just switch my phone to silent. The first you've already done, which is to show up. So here you are, welcome. Thanks for joining us on day 2. The second is to try as much as you can to be as present as possible. I don't know about you, but I've spent the last 18 months mastering the art of the multitask and doing 17 things at the same time in this online world that we live in. And I'm really going to encourage you today to try and do as little of that as possible. Obviously, it's kind of necessary and can be very helpful at some points. But the more present you are for our discussions, the richer they'll be. And it also might be a good thing for your general levels of exhaustion and sanity. The third thing, and this is really the big one, is to engage. We really want this event to be as interactive as possible. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers and facilitators, but PILG is really made by all of you. So please do get involved. You can ask questions in the discussion sessions, post as much as you like in the chat. We've specifically run this as a Zoom meeting rather than a Zoom webinar, which can often feel a little bit kind of distant and cold and removed. So please do get involved. The other thing you can do is to use the emoticons. If you haven't used them before, if you kind of hover your cursor at the bottom of your screen so that the toolbar comes up, you'll see there's a tab that says reactions. Thanks, Lucy. Lucy's pioneering the use of reactions for us. You'll see there's a whole bunch of different options there. So give it a whirl now. You can give a round of applause, a thumbs up, a celebration, whatever it is that you're feeling. Thanks, and Tabiseng. And Kwazi's also having a bit of a party, I see. So please do use those throughout the event. I'm sure all of us have had that experience of feeling like we are kind of speaking into a vacuum. So it's always nice to know that there are people out there behind the boxes. We're keeping cameras to a minimum at the moment just because a lot of people are joining us with data constraints, but we would like it to still feel like a bit of a community. The fourth thing you can do is to spread the word. So if you are a tweeter or a Facebooker, please do track PILG in that way and kind of spread awareness of the event and share the discussions that we're having. And then the fifth thing is to continue discussions after the event. PILG happens once a year. It's always a kind of rich set of engagements, but we really don't want things to stop here. That this is a kind of continuing process of learning from each other as we continue our work in social justice, particularly around the use of public interest law. And as part of that, one of the things we're doing this year is producing a report out of PILG that will be available in a couple of weeks, and hopefully can be a resource that you guys can all use in taking these discussions further. And the last thing is to take care of yourselves. We know that these are difficult times. The work is hard. So please do remember to be kind and compassionate to yourselves. So just a quick run through of today's program. First up, we will, on the topic of kindness and compassion, we're going to have another session guided by Dr. Lucy Draper-Clark. Lucy ran a fantastic session for us at the end of yesterday. Hi, Lucy, in which we got a better understanding of the ways in which, as activists, we've been responding to the pandemic and how we might start building our resilience going forward for the struggles to come. And so this morning's session will build on that, and I think we're going to be talking about some self-compassion practices. We'll then have a short break and move into our first plenary of the day, which is going to be talking about threatened and collapsing state institutions. So state capability in general, but in the COVID pandemic in particular, came up quite strongly in most of the discussions we had yesterday. So we'll be continuing that thread in that plenary. Another short break, then we'll have our first set of parallel discussions. So we're using the breakout row rather than two. And so we've hopefully kind of ironed out some of the technical glitches, and will be on hand to help you all choose which breakout room and which panel discussion you want to be part of. Then we're going to break for lunch. After lunch is our second round of sessions. Then another quick break. And then our last plenary of the event, which is a chance for us to hear from some of the donors that support social justice work, and to have a bit of a discussion about the future of funding for public interest legal work. And then we'll wrap up. So thanks for joining us on day 2. Stay with us for as long as you're able, and please do participate and engage as much as you can. And so I'll now
Good morning, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here again with so many people. As Lisa said, we're going to explore some of the self-compassion practices. What I thought might be helpful, though, for people who were there yesterday is to run through what we did, and for people who weren't able to make it yesterday afternoon, for you to get a quick taste of where we were going together. So I'll just bring up the slides and we can have a little refresher. So as Lisa said, in order to really carry on doing this difficult work of social justice, we need to care for ourselves. And because it's ceaseless, it just doesn't end. You know, we get to one level of improved humanity, as it were, and then there's another level that we need to get to. So this is lifelong work. And just a reminder that you are standing on the shoulders of incredible social justice lawyers and activists and NGO workers before. So really feel into that ancestry, that lineage that South Africa has offered the whole world. But how can we do this? By maintaining our own dignity, by maintaining our own lightness of being in the face of big challenges. And I was with a lawyer friend the other day who said, we feel like we're winning battles, but we're losing the war. And this is a very overwhelming sense that, you know, there may be small gains, but it feels like the forces are just too big for us sometimes. And so that's what we were talking about, is how we respond to these big structural issues. So this is an extra slide that I've put in for some of you. It's work that I've been exploring at WITS, and it's Roy Bascar's work. And it talks about how we exist at 7 different levels, like there's a laminated reality. So we have sort of 7 different levels that we as individuals engage in. So at the bottom, there's our own consciousness, our psychology, if you like. And that's what we are working on today. That's where we have the greatest amount of agency. It's where we can actually do something about our situation. And many of us also have agency at the 2nd level in terms of our material circumstances, but not always. COVID has taken away so many jobs that we've felt vulnerable to this, the bigger forces, if you like. And then we move up in terms of how we are in terms of like face-to-face interactions. And this is something that came up yesterday, is often we become dispirited, we become burnt out, not because of the work that we're doing, not because of, challenging the structures in the society, but because of internal problems. And I read a recent report in terms of racial justice that in America anyway, the burnout for Black racial justice activists was mainly because of their white racial justice counterparts, because they unwittingly, the white racial justice activists were unwittingly perpetuating the societal structures within their own organization. And this is where we realize that we keep having to come back to our own awareness, our own personal transformation, our own ability to notice what we may be doing, what we may be perpetuating, without it being, it's an unconscious perpetuation of structures. So that is why my work has been particularly on the contemplative practice, on the personal, because then it has an effect up through these different layers. And then the 4th layer, I imagine, is really where most of you place yourselves, the structures of our society. And of course, structure, as it says there on the slide, it either limits our actions as agents. So I attended a talk yesterday about the reclaimers. The way that the COVID pandemic didn't classify them as essential workers limited their agency. And it required those of you who were supporting them to shift that structure. But also structure can enable our actions as agents. And that's where we want to continuously transform, improve our society and our global systems as well. While at the same time, our actions either reproduce structures. So that's what I mentioned, without it necessarily being conscious, we may be reproducing those systems of oppression that we're facing. And it happens in the gender perspective, in the racial perspective, all the social structures. Or our personal agency can transform the structures above us. So this is all of it academic, but I just felt that it answered some of the questions that came up yesterday in the chat. So also what we looked at yesterday is how we respond to trauma or to ungroundedness, to things we can't control. Many of us go into that hyper-arousal where we fight back, we're active, we want to make a change, we want to do something. But increasingly, and the feedback I got on the group yesterday was that actually a lot of you experienced that hypo-arousal state where you actually just felt that you needed to withdraw, to shut down. There was a numbness, an emptiness, a lack of purpose. So that's a difficult state to come through from. I won't go into this one. We looked at it yesterday, but it's basically about with self-awareness, we can overcome our histories of trauma. And now we can play a more effective role in the communities and in the associations, the organizations that we're part of. So we sit down to rise up, and I'm going to just unshare the screen so that we can see each other. And today we're going to look at Oh, excuse me. I have a little bodyguard here who's trying to protect me. Shush. We're going to look at self-compassion practices. So the self-compassion practices start with the basic mindfulness that we talked about yesterday, becoming aware of what's going on within us. And of course, we have a choice in each moment. When a difficulty arises, we either run away from that difficulty. That's really quite an intuitive response, isn't it? Like if something bad happens, we go into flight mode. But in the world of self-awareness, what we do is turn towards the difficulty. And then we also recognize, because when we have a difficulty, many of us isolate ourselves. We disappear into a cave, or we stop communicating with other people. But sadly, that is the worst way to actually get through a difficulty. You know, the way we are wired is for social connection. So when we can share our difficulties with another, when we can look somebody in the eyes, when we can feel a safe and kind touch, then we are much more resourced in order to get through a difficult time. And we mentioned yesterday about having peer support groups to take care of us, people who are in the same boat and understand our struggles, but don't try and fix us. They just let us move through the process of grieving, or the process of anger, or the process of dispiritedness. They hold the space for us while we're having these difficulties. So instead of isolating ourselves, what we do is recognize that there is common humanity, that all of us as human beings experience struggles. And it's one thing I would say is maybe a benefit from the pandemic, is that we've been much more open about our struggles. We've been more open about the old traumatic imprints that have raised their heads now that we are separate from our communities. So this idea of common humanity has maybe been enhanced a little bit more. And of course, we realize how interconnected we all are. When a little virus, a little tiny microscopic, can actually have such a massive impact on the whole world. So we are all equally human. We're all in the same boat. Whatever position in society we play, whatever role we play, we have the same emotions. We have the same relationship with struggle, with challenge. Whatever the story behind the difficulty is, we all experience pain, we all experience sorrow, we all experience anger or jealousy or grief. So the third aspect of the self-compassion work is that instead of criticizing ourselves, we want to offer ourselves internal support. And it's sometimes we don't realize that we actually can play this dual role. You know, we have the emotional part of our brain, the limbic system, but we also have the more rational, the more regulated part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. And there's a model that we sometimes use. We imagine this is the amygdala, the thumb, and it's part of the limbic system. And then we have our prefrontal cortex that covers it. You may want to do this little model for yourself, just with your hand. And when you feel emotionally triggered, it's as if the prefrontal cortex explodes, or, you know, the amygdala explodes. We sort of flip our lid. We lose our ability to be rational, to make good decisions, to be creative. We lose it. And I'm sure all of us have experienced that. So what we try and do with mindfulness practices that train our mind to be more aware of what's happening inside us, is we want to be able to keep ourselves regulated. And we do that in a number of ways that we explored yesterday. We looked at breath, we looked at ways to remove stress from our body in terms of movement, walking or dancing, or practices like yoga or qigong. All of those things remove that tension from the body so that the mind can stay balanced and regulated. So we learn to train the mind, which actually alters the structures of the brain, which then can enhance the capacity of the mind. So it's a 3-step process. This is some of the work of Rick Hansen. We do practices that train our mind to stay present, to appreciate things that are going well in our life, and to take care of things that are going badly. And in that very act of compassionate training, we actually shift the neural pathways in the brain. And that's why we notice certain people seem to have personality traits that are, attentive. They are regulated. They are able to withstand difficulties in a measured way. And we think of that as something they're born with. But research of the last 30 years has shown that no, we can actually, through neuroplasticity, we can change the structure of our brain so that all of us have the capacity to be more regulated, to be more compassionate to ourselves and to others, and also to live a passionate life where we're using our energy for the things that we enjoy, the things that resource us. So the model says, first of all, we train in dispassion. So that's that regulation. It's about not letting our emotions rule us. We're the driver of the car. The emotion is in the back seat, like causing chaos. You can imagine like a child who's tired or hungry, they're causing chaos in the back seat. We wouldn't let them drive the car. We ourselves, our more rational, regulated self is driving the car. So that's where we train in dispassion. But the second phase is to train in compassion, because that allows us to meet the difficulties of life in a way that has agency and doesn't get depleted. And once we're able to put those two into effect, then we can live our passions. We can really direct our energy in a way that is supportive for our work. So let's do a practice together. We just have a few minutes. So sitting up straight. There's something about elongating the spine that gives us a sense of dignity and makes us remember who we are, the fullness of our potential. And noticing the breath, seeing if it can deepen and slow down just a little bit. And then bringing to mind maybe something from yesterday, either a conversation that brought up difficult emotions, or maybe something that happened in a relationship at home, something that you would describe as a difficult experience. Just bring that to mind. And then without turning away from it, note for yourself that that was a moment of difficulty. Just labeling it as that. Or something triggered me, or I felt vulnerable or overwhelmed. Allow yourself to give a name to the challenge.
Miffy?
Hello? Okay, I think that's a mute. And then the second part of the practice is to remember that every single person on this call, in this conference, in this world, experiences similar difficulties. We are not alone. So touching into that common humanity can bring us back into relationship, into a sense of being a family of beings who experience pain and suffering. And then the third part of the practice is just to bring a hand onto the heart. So a gesture of care, or you may want to hug yourself. And feel how it feels with a warm touch, the sensation of a hand against the chest. And then saying to yourself, let me be kind to myself. Let me give myself the compassion that I would give to my client, to my child, to my friend. Let me recognize myself as equally worthy of care. Because we know that when we're struggling with difficulty, when ruminating thoughts are going round and round, it depletes our energy completely. If we can give ourselves a gesture of care, it can allow the difficulty to depart. Without fixing or changing anything, it's about expanding our ability to cope so that the difficulty may seem a little bit smaller. So we go through those 3 steps again, acknowledging something that is challenging about the work you do, the interactions that you have, or the challenges within families as well. Just naming, this is difficult. And then remembering that we're part of this vast human family. We all experience the same difficulties. To me, it often feels like taking off my own personal rucksack, putting it aside, knowing that we're all carrying things and we can all help each other carry our burdens. And the third aspect is to show kindness in the moment of challenge. And one of the things we spoke of yesterday was when somebody else is behaving unskillfully, when they are causing harm, if we look deeply into their circumstances, we find that they too are struggling. And it doesn't justify their behavior, but it allows us to understand the root cause and then to act accordingly. So this is our work of transformation, of transforming our own hearts and minds, and then imagining that, allowing that to move through all the layers of our being, the roles that we play in our family, in our society, our role within the global structures. So just by way of closing our session, maybe you could pop into the chat, how you're feeling in this moment. Just, a word of what's present for you, what state you are experiencing this moment in your emotional world. It would be interesting to hear or to read. And while you're typing, I'll just show you an embodied practice that I mentioned yesterday, where we imagine ourselves holding in front all the things we have to take care of. That's our work, our communities, our families. And in order to do that, we might need to turn our hands the other way and build some sort of boundary. That is a place of compassion. A clear boundary so that we don't keep taking on more and more things and then becoming overwhelmed ourselves. So we're holding things in care, we are boundering, and then we can bring that care in at a very personal level, taking care of who we are. So I see a few things come into the chat. I'll just read them out, and I realize it is my time to say goodbye. So thank you, Lolo, feeling empowered, Lisa, connected, Damaris, enlightened, Busisiwe, compassionate, Ntabis saying emptiness. Now that's an interesting word. In some traditions, that is this place of potency, where you don't know what's going to happen. But sometimes for us, it can feel like absolute depletion. So Ntabi is saying just note for yourself what that emptiness means. And if you need something to nourish you, to fill you up, to support you, then do what you need to do. Reassured, motivated, and also nothingness. So sometimes this emptiness, this nothingness can be a place where our mind is actually at rest. So often we have ruminating thoughts that just deplete us. But in that nothingness, occasionally we can touch into our creative mind, the one that can give solutions. And thank you, Kwazi. We often have, many of us have been feeling numb at this time, like we don't want to feel because the feelings are too much. And that's where I mentioned yesterday, taking the support of peers, people who will hold a space for you so that you can talk through that numbness. Also, I'll just put my details in the chat box, but you're very welcome to contact me through my website. Yeah, overwhelmed but hopeful. Okay, and that's another thing we find when we become more aware, we realize we hold what seems like polarities. Yeah, burnt out. I'm sorry. I know that's really a feature of this arena, this social justice work. And lonely, we need to come together, not just on the screen, I know, but with others. Look at people in the eyes, appreciate what it means to be really connected deeply. All right, so thank you. I'll hand back over to Lisa and the others, and I'll just put in my website is my name, so you can always just Google me from the program, lucydraperclark.com. And if you want support in terms of meditations, then I have many free meditations up on an app called Insight Timer. And that's a way that many people just get support of being guided every morning to settle in and to relax. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me. It's probably quite a shift in direction from previous pills, but I think it probably represents the needs of the moment.
Thanks, Lucy. And I think, you know, just getting a sense from people's responses is that perhaps this is something that as the community of people that participate in Pilg every year, it's something we need to think about kind of going forward. So thanks for those immediate resources, but perhaps there's a kind of more sustained conversation that all of us need to be having about self-care, collective care, resilience building in the context of the work that we do and the people that we are. So we're going to take a short break now. Lucy, there was one question from Damaris. Perhaps you could just pop something in the chat during our break. But we'll take a break now until 9:30. We know that social justice work runs almost entirely on caffeine. So here's your moment. And we'll be back at 9:30 for our first plenary. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.